Nobody at Riverside General Hospital paid much attention to Zara Quinn. That was the way she preferred it. She came in early, clocked in without fanfare, pulled her dark hair into a low bun, and moved through the halls of the busy urban hospital with quiet efficiency. But what nobody knew was about to walk through those hospital doors and change everything. She was the new one, the rookie, still on her 6-month probationary period, still learning the names of attending physicians and memorizing the Byzantine hierarchy of nurses, residents, and specialists who all seemed to have an opinion about her. Most of those opinions weren't flattering. She was 28, which some of the older nurses said was too old to be starting fresh. She had no prestigious university name on her credential badge, just a state nursing program and a GED she'd earned before enlisting. What she did have was a stillness about her, a calm that ran so deep it unnerved people without them understanding why. They didn't know what to do with a person who never flinched, never panicked, never seemed rattled by the screaming chaos of an emergency bay. They called her robotic behind her back. They called her cold. Dr. Marcus Hale called her incompetent, and he did it to her face. Hale was the kind of physician who had built his entire personality around the prestige of being a physician. He wore his white coat like armor, spoke in declarative sentences that left no room for question, and had a particular talent for making the nursing staff feel invisible unless they were doing something wrong, at which point they became very visible indeed. He'd had it out for Zara since her 3rd week, when she'd quietly corrected a medication dosage he prescribed for a pediatric patient and flagged it to the charge nurse instead of confronting him directly. The patient had been protected. Hale's ego had not. Since then, he made a point of questioning her assessments in front of other staff, dismissing her observations, and peppering her with questions during rounds that were designed to humiliate rather than educate. That morning was no different. He stopped in front of the supply cart she was restocking, crossed his arms, and looked at her the way a person looks at something stuck to the bottom of their shoe. "Quinn," he said, loud enough for the 3 residents trailing him to hear clearly. "Tell me, what's the protocol for a tension pneumothorax in a patient presenting without classic tracheal deviation?" Zara didn't look up from the 4 bags she was cataloging. She answered without hesitation. She described needle decompression, the landmark, the gauge, the follow-up thoracostomy, the patient monitoring parameters, the contraindications, and the 2-person confirmation protocol she'd seen neglected twice in her short time at this hospital. She answered the way someone answers a question they have lived through, not studied for. The silence that followed was brief. Hale recovered quickly, scoffing that it was a textbook recitation and that anyone could memorize a textbook. He told her to get back to her stocking and not to practice medicine beyond her station. He walked away. The residents followed. One of them, a young woman named Dr. Priya Mehta, lingered for just a second and met Zara's eyes with an expression that wasn't pity exactly, but close enough to it, that Zara looked away first. The morning became the kind of morning Riverside General was both proud of and quietly terrified by. The kind where the emergencies came in waves and the controlled chaos of the emergency department metastasized outward into the halls. A multi-vehicle accident on the interstate sent 7 patients through their doors in under 40 minutes. Zara was pulled from her floor assignment and sent to assist in the bay, which was standard procedure when volume spiked. She worked without being asked, anticipating needs, moving between beds with the kind of spatial awareness that experienced trauma nurses spent years developing. When a man came in with a penetrating abdominal wound that was bleeding faster than the attending could manage, it was Zara who applied direct pressure with the precise technique that slowed the hemorrhage enough to buy the surgical team the time they needed. When a teenager arrived in respiratory distress and the attending hesitated, genuinely froze for 2 full seconds, it was Zara who handed him the intubation kit already assembled, laryngoscope blade already in position, tube size already selected based on the kid's approximate weight. She did not make a production of it. She did not announce herself. She just worked, and she kept working until the wave broke and the bay quieted, and the people who had been drowning in it surfaced again, and looked around at what had survived. Dr. Hale arrived in the bay 40 minutes into the chaos. He hadn't been called. He wasn't on emergency rotation, but word traveled fast in hospitals, and he had a habit of appearing wherever his authority might be reinforced. He watched Zara from the doorway for a long moment before entering. When he did, he went straight to the charge nurse, a veteran named Sandra Ochoa, and told her that a probationary nurse had been operating outside her scope and that it needed to be documented. Sandra looked at him with the particular exhaustion of a woman who has worked 30 years in emergency medicine and has no patience left for territorial men. She told him that Zara had operated well within her scope, that every intervention had been appropriate, and that without her, the morning would have looked significantly worse. Hale told Sandra that this wasn't her decision to make, and that he would be escalating it to the nursing director. He said Zara was reckless, unsupervised, and needed to be reviewed before she hurt someone. Then he said something else, something lower, something meant only for Sandra, but spoken in the particular carrying tone of a man who's never had to worry about being overheard. And what he said was that maybe they needed to reconsider whether someone with Zara's background was suited for patient care at all. Sandra went very still. So did Zara, who was standing 10 feet away with a biohazard bag in her hands and had heard every word.
She didn't respond.
She didn't storm across the bay or raise her voice or let the thing cracking open in her chest show on her face. She tied off the bag, placed it in the correct receptacle, stripped her gloves, washed her hands for the required 20 seconds, and walked out of the bay and into the staff bathroom at the end of the hall. She stood at the sink with the water running cold over her wrists, and she breathed, deliberately, methodically, the way she had been trained to breathe in situations that were trying to pull her under. She had survived things Marcus Hale could not dream of. She had done things in the dark, in places that didn't exist on any map he would ever look at. She had buried teammates and completed missions and come home to a world that didn't know how to absorb her, and so she had reabsorbed herself, quietly, completely into this life, this work, this identity she was still learning to wear. She was not going to let one small man unravel her. She looked at herself in the mirror. She breathed out. She went back to work. And she had no way of knowing that by the following morning, everything was about to change. Before we go on, if you love stories about quiet strength finally being seen, hit subscribe on Fireside Files right now, because what happens next, you will not want to miss. The call came through the hospital's main security desk at 9:47 in the morning. The woman who answered it, a retired police dispatcher named Donna, who had seen most things, later said that the voice on the other end was professional to a degree that made her sit up straighter, without knowing why. The caller identified himself, provided a federal agency contact number for verification, and stated that a team would be arriving at Riverside General Hospital at approximately 10:15, and that they requested a brief, non-disruptive access to a staff member named Zara Quinn. Donna verified the contact number. Then she called it again, just to be sure. The verification came back clean. She notified the nursing director, who notified the hospital administrator, who called Dr. Hale, because Hale had submitted a formal review request on Zara that morning, and the administrator wanted the relevant parties informed. Hale received the message and assumed it was an investigative visit. He smiled to himself in a way that he thought conveyed dignity, and actually conveyed something much smaller. At 10:12, the lobby of Riverside General became a different kind of space. They came in through the main entrance, 8 of them, in tactical clothing that was subdued enough to pass for civilian, but was clearly not civilian to anyone who knew what they were looking at. They moved in the practiced, unhurried way of people who never rush, because they've trained their bodies to operate at precisely the speed required and no faster. They were male and female, various ages, various builds, and they shared the quality that Zara shared, that absolute stillness beneath the motion, that eyes everywhere situational awareness that never turns off. They announced themselves at the security desk with credentials that made the guard call his supervisor immediately. They said they were looking for Nurse Zara Quinn. They said it was not an emergency. They said it was personal. The lobby went quiet in the particular way that spaces go quiet when something that doesn't fit the established order walks into them. Patients in waiting chairs looked up from their phones. Orderlies slowed. A nurse at the nearby station leaned over to another nurse and said something in a low voice that the other nurse didn't answer because she was too busy watching the door. Someone had already sent a message to the floor. The message traveled the way messages travel in hospitals, faster than policy and quieter than announcement, and it reached Sandra Ochoa, who looked at her phone and then looked across the nurse's station at Zara, who was updating patient charts on a tablet and had no idea. Sandra came around the desk. She touched Zara's arm gently and told her there were people in the lobby asking for her. She said they had federal credentials. She said it carefully, watching Zara's face for reaction. What she saw was not fear. It was not confusion. What she saw pass across Zara's face was something Sandra couldn't name in the moment, but would describe later as recognition. The look of a person who has been waiting for something to eventually catch up with them and has simply been uncertain of its shape.
Zara set the tablet down.
She straightened her scrubs. She said she'd go see what they needed, and she walked toward the elevator with the same unhurried, measured step she always used. And Sandra stood watching her and felt the strange sensation of seeing someone she thought she knew become, in a single moment, someone she did not know at all. But nothing could have prepared anyone in that lobby for what happened next. Dr. Hale was in the lobby when Zara stepped out of the elevator. He positioned himself near the administrative desk in a way he believed looked supervisory. He watched the group of tactical figures turn in unison when Zara emerged from the elevator bank. He watched something pass through that group, a current, a shift, and then the one at the front, a broad-shouldered man in his mid-40s with a jaw like a geographic feature and eyes that had seen things that would reclassify his nightmares, stepped forward. And he didn't extend a hand. He stood at attention. He came to full, rigid, formal military attention in the middle of the lobby of Riverside General Hospital, and he rendered a salute, a precise, deliberate, unambiguous salute, directed at Zara Quinn, in her mint green scrubs, with the pen still clipped to her breast pocket. Behind him, the other 7 did the same. 8 people standing at attention, saluting a rookie nurse who was supposed to be on chart review for the next 2 hours. The lobby was completely silent. Zara looked at them for one long second, then she stood up straighter, and it was different from how she normally stood, different from the careful, slight smallness she'd been wearing since she arrived at this hospital, the unconscious shrinking that people in her position learn to do to take up less space in rooms where they aren't fully wanted. She stood like someone whose body remembered exactly what it was built to do. She returned the salute, clean, exact, automatic. The man lowered his hand and said, voice carrying clearly through the lobby, that they were there because 3 weeks ago a tip from an anonymous source, later confirmed to be Zara, had led their unit to the interdiction of a domestic terror plot that would have killed hundreds of people. He said the source had declined to be identified. He said they'd spent 3 weeks tracing the intelligence back to its origin. He said they'd found her. He said they wanted to thank her in person, and that they wanted her to know that the people she'd once served with, the ones still living, had not forgotten her and never would. Then he said her name, her real name, not the quiet civilian softness of Zara Quinn, but the full operational designation she'd carried through 4 years of assignments that did not officially exist. And he said it with the particular reverence that men reserve for people who have saved their lives. Dr. Hale stood 6 feet away through all of it. He did not move. His face went through several stages that would have been interesting to catalog. The administrator beside him said nothing. The residents who had followed Hale into the lobby said nothing. Sandra Ochoa, who had come down without anyone noticing, stood near the elevator bank with her hand over her mouth. The lobby remained in that extraordinary silence for a long moment after the salute broke and Zara stepped forward to embrace the first of them, and the second, and the third, and the room watched a person they had underestimated, ignored, dismissed, and diminished, become visible, fully, completely, undeniably visible, in a way that no one in that building would ever be able to reverse. The group had moved to a quieter corner, and Hale crossed the lobby and stopped a few feet away, and for the first time since Zara had met him, he did not seem certain of what his next word should be.
Zara looked at him.
She waited. He said her name, Quinn, and paused again. She let the pause exist. Finally, he said he hadn't known. She told him she was aware of that. He said perhaps he'd been too harsh in his recent assessment. She told him that an apology, if one was forthcoming, should probably also be directed at Sandra. He blinked. She turned back to her team, without waiting to see if he followed through. He did, actually. Sandra told the story for years. By that afternoon, the hospital had processed the morning's events in the way institutions process the things that overturn their assumptions, slowly, imperfectly, with a mix of embarrassment and recalibration. The nursing director withdrew the formal review. The administrator sent Zara a meeting request she hadn't decided whether to accept. Dr. Priya Mehta found her in the break room and sat across from her and said simply that she'd learned something today and asked if Zara would be willing to grab coffee sometime. And Zara said maybe, which was more than she said to most people. What didn't change was Zara herself. She finished her shift. She restocked the supply carts. She updated her charts. She answered a call bell on the third floor for a 73-year-old patient named Mr. Abramovich, who couldn't reach his water cup, and she handed it to him and adjusted his pillow and asked if he needed anything else. And he said she was very kind, and she said she tried to be. She clocked out at 7 o'clock, walked to her car, and sat in it for a long moment in the parking structure's gray quiet before starting the engine. She had not become a nurse because it was easy. She had not come here to be recognized. She had come because after everything the dark years had asked her to carry, she needed to spend some of the remaining ones putting people back together instead of the other way around. She was not done yet. She was, in fact, just beginning. And that is the power of a woman who never needed you to know her name, to do the right thing. If this story moved you, if Zara's journey hit somewhere real, then Fireside Files is your home. Subscribe right now, hit that bell, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded that the quietest person in the room is sometimes the most extraordinary. We'll see you in the next story, right here on Fireside Files.